Captain Sarah Chun pressed her palm against the cold metal wall of her prison cell, feeling the alien ship's vibrations through her fingertips. 3 days had passed since the Korvathian raiders captured her during the failed rescue mission on Zirian Prime. 3 days of stale recycled air, synthetic protein blocks, and the constant hum of engines carrying her toward an unknown fate. The cell was barely large enough for her to stretch out fully, designed more for cargo than living beings. But Sarah had endured worse conditions during her years with the Human Defense Corps. What troubled her wasn't the cramped space or poor food. It was the complete silence from her team. Were Commander Rodriguez and the others still alive? Had they made it back to the fleet? A sharp clang echoed through the corridor outside her cell. Sarah's trained ears caught the sound of multiple footsteps approaching, heavy boots on metal decking. She moved away from the wall and centered herself in the small space, shoulders back, chin up. Whatever was coming, she would face it with the dignity of a human warrior. The cell door hissed open with a pneumatic wheeze. 3 Korvathian guards stood in the doorway, their insectoid features hidden behind dark tactical masks. Each stood nearly 7 feet tall, their chitinous armor gleaming under the harsh overhead lights. One gestured with a plasma rifle toward the corridor. "Move, human," the lead guard clicked in broken universal standard. "The Overlord wishes to see his prize." Sarah walked between the guards down a maze of corridors that all looked identical. Gray metal walls lined with pipes and conduits, punctuated by sealed doors marked with alien symbols. The ship was massive, far larger than any human vessel she had served on. The Korvathians had built it for conquest, not exploration. Every surface spoke of military efficiency and brutal functionality. They passed several other prisoners being led in different directions. Sarah recognized some as colonists from Zirian Prime, their faces gaunt with fear and exhaustion. Others appeared to be from various alien species. Tall, blue-skinned humanoids she didn't recognize, small furry creatures with large eyes, and what looked like crystalline beings that refracted the corridor lights in rainbow patterns. The guard stopped before a massive door marked with red warning symbols. One of them placed his clawed hand on a scanner, and the portal slid open with a deep rumble. Beyond lay a chamber that took Sarah's breath away. The room was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadows high above. Strange alien artifacts lined the walls, weapons, art objects, and technological devices from dozens of different civilizations. But what dominated the space was the figure seated on a throne made from what appeared to be the hull of a destroyed starship. The Korvathian overlord was the largest member of his species Sarah had ever seen. His exoskeleton was scarred from countless battles, and additional armor plates had been grafted onto his natural carapace. For arms extended from his torso, each ending in hands that could crush steel. But it was his eyes that held her attention, compound eyes that seemed to analyze her from every angle simultaneously. So, the Overlord spoke in perfect universal standard, his voice carrying the clicking undertones of his species. "This is the human warrior who killed 30 of my soldiers during the siege of Zirian Prime." Sarah remained silent. She had learned long ago that in situations like this, it was better to listen than to speak. Information was a weapon, and she wouldn't hand it to her enemy freely. The Overlord rose from his throne and descended the steps slowly, each footfall echoing in the vast chamber. "Your silence is wise, human. Many prisoners come before me begging for their lives or demanding to know their fate. You simply observe." He circled her like a predator studying prey. Sarah tracked his movement without turning her head, using her peripheral vision to maintain awareness while appearing calm and unafraid. "My intelligence officers have compiled quite a file on you, Captain Sarah Chun of the Human Defense Corps. Born on Earth's colony, Moon Luna. Graduated top of your class from the Titan Military Academy. Served in 3 major campaigns against the Hegemony Alliance. Decorated for valor no fewer than 7 times. The Overlord paused directly in front of her. "They say humans are unusually tenacious in battle. That you fight longer and harder than any other species in the galaxy. Is this true? We fight for what we believe in, Sarah replied simply. The Overlord made a sound that might have been laughter. Yes, I have seen evidence of this belief in action. Your species fascinates me, human. Most civilizations, when faced with superior force, submit or negotiate. Humans seem to view impossible odds as a personal challenge. He gestured toward one of the wall displays, where Sarah could see what appeared to be tactical recordings of various battles. Take the Battle of Kepler Station. 50,000 human defenders against 500,000 hegemony troops. By all military doctrine, the humans should have surrendered immediately. Instead, they held that station for 6 months and inflicted casualties at a ratio of nearly 10-1 before falling. Sarah felt a surge of pride, despite her circumstances. She had studied that battle in the academy. The defenders of Kepler Station had become legends throughout human space. Or consider the evacuation of New Geneva, the Overlord continued. When the Skarathi plague bombs hit the surface, most species would have written off the population as lost. But human rescue teams went back into that toxic hell 17 times to extract survivors. Many of the rescuers died from radiation poisoning, but they saved over 200,000 civilians. Why are you telling me this? Sarah asked. The Overlord's mandibles clicked in what she was beginning to recognize as amusement. Because, Captain Shun, I have a proposition for you. But, first, you need to understand the full scope of what I am offering. He led her to another section of the chamber, where a massive viewing port looked out into space. Sarah gasped despite herself. The ship was approaching a solar system unlike anything she had ever seen. 3 suns of different colors, red, blue, and yellow, orbited each other in a complex dance, casting shifting patterns of light across dozens of planets and moons. Welcome to the Drachmer system, the Overlord said. For 10,000 years, this system has been the center of the galaxy's most exclusive and lucrative enterprise. Which is? Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect she didn't want to know the answer. Gladiatorial combat, Captain, but not the crude blood sports you might imagine. This is an art form refined over millennia. Warriors from across the galaxy come here to test themselves against the ultimate challenges. The rewards for success are beyond imagination. Wealth, fame, and the respect of entire civilizations. Sarah turned from the viewport to face him directly. And if they fail, then they die with honor in the arena, and their names are remembered in the Hall of Warriors for all eternity. The Overlord moved closer. But here's what makes my proposition so interesting, human. In all the recorded history of the Drachmer arenas, no human has ever competed. Because you've never captured any before? Oh, we have captured many humans over the centuries. But they have always been sold to other buyers, slavers, research facilities, private collectors. The arena masters believed humans were too small, too weak, too short-lived to provide interesting combat. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. And you disagree? After studying your military records and witnessing your performance on Zirion Prime, I believe they are profoundly wrong. I think a human warrior, properly motivated and equipped, could not only survive in the arenas, but potentially become a champion unlike any the galaxy has ever seen. The Overlord returned to his throne and settled into it with a satisfied air. So here's my offer, Captain Shun. Enter the arena as my sponsored gladiator. Win your first 10 matches, and I will release not only you, but all the prisoners we took from Zirion Prime. Your people will be returned safely to human space with compensation for their ordeal. And if I lose, then you die fighting, which I suspect is how you would prefer to meet your end anyway. Far better than rotting in a slave camp or being dissected in some collector's laboratory. Sarah considered the offer. It was clearly designed to appeal to her sense of duty. The chance to save the other prisoners would be almost impossible for her to refuse, and the Overlord knew it. But there had to be more to it than simple entertainment value. Weren't you telling me? She asked. The Overlord's compound eyes seemed to glitter with approval. Perceptive. Very well. The truth is, Captain, that I have made substantial wagers with my rivals regarding human capabilities in combat. If you succeed, I will profit enormously. If you fail, I lose significant resources and face some degree of social embarrassment. So I'm both a gladiator and a business investment. Precisely. But do not let that diminish the significance of what I'm offering. Win your matches, and you will not only free your people, but also elevate the status of humanity throughout the galaxy. Every species will know that humans are warriors to be respected and feared. Sarah walked to the viewport again, staring out at the alien suns. The offer was clearly a trap of some kind, but she couldn't see how refusing would improve her situation or help the other prisoners. And there was something in the Overlord's manner that suggested he was being honest about the basic terms, even if he was hiding details. The arena, she said finally. What kind of combat are we talking about? That varies. Sometimes it is single combat against other gladiators. Sometimes it involves fighting dangerous creatures. Sometimes it requires solving complex challenges while under attack. The arena masters pride themselves on variety and unpredictability. Weapons, provided based on the specific nature of each match. You will not be sent in defenseless. Sarah turned back to face him. I want to see the other prisoners first. I want to confirm they're alive and unharmed. Of course, that can be arranged. And I want details about the arena rules, the types of opponents I might face, and the specific terms of their release if I succeed. All reasonable requests. Sarah took a deep breath. She was about to commit herself to a course of action that would likely end in her death. But if there was even a chance of saving the others, she had to try. It was what her oath as a Defense Corps officer demanded. I accept your offer, she said. The Overlord rose from his throne, towering over her. Excellent. Guards, escort Captain Shun to the prisoner-holding area. Let her verify the condition of her people. Then, take her to the preparation chambers. As they walked back through the corridors, Sarah's mind was already racing ahead to what awaited her. She had fought in 3 wars and survived dozens of battles, but those had been conflicts between organized military forces with rules, objectives, and support structures. This would be something entirely different. The holding area turned out to be a large chamber filled with energy cells similar to the one she had occupied. As they passed each cell, Sarah counted familiar faces, colonists she had tried to save on Zirian Prime, including Dr. Martinez and her 2 young children. All appeared to be alive and receiving basic care. Sarah, Dr. Martinez called out as she recognized her. What's happening? Where are they taking us? I'm going to get you out of here, Sarah replied, making sure her voice carried to all the prisoners. Just hold on a little longer. The guards didn't stop her from speaking, which suggested the Overlord wanted the other prisoners to understand the stakes of her upcoming matches. More motivation for her to succeed, and more pressure if she began to falter. The preparation chambers were unlike anything Sarah had expected. Instead of crude cells or training areas, she found herself in what amounted to a luxury suite. The main room contained comfortable furniture, a bathroom with actual hot water, and a food dispenser stocked with items that, while alien, were clearly of high quality. One wall was dominated by a massive display screen, and as Sarah approached it, the screen activated automatically. Text appeared in Universal Standard, followed by images and video footage. Welcome, Gladiator Chun, an artificial voice announced. You have been registered as a competitor in the grand arenas of Drakmar. Your first match is scheduled in 7 standard days. Please use this time to review combat footage, study potential opponents, and maintain peak physical condition. The screen began displaying highlights from recent arena matches. Sarah watched in fascination and growing alarm as warriors from dozens of different species fought in elaborate arenas that seemed to shift and change during combat. Some matches were straightforward duels, but others involved complex environmental hazards, multiple opponents, or objectives beyond simple combat. One match showed a lone fighter, some kind of reptilian humanoid, facing 3 opponents in an arena that appeared to be the interior of a starship. As she watched, sections of the floor suddenly opened to reveal spinning mechanical hazards, while the walls began closing in from multiple directions. The The reptilian warrior had to defeat his opponents while simultaneously solving a series of puzzles to stop the environmental threats. Another match took place in what looked like a jungle environment, complete with dangerous native creatures that attacked both combatants indiscriminately. The fighters had to work together temporarily to survive the wildlife, then resume their battle once the immediate threat was neutralized. A third recording showed something that made Sarah's blood run cold. The arena had been filled with a thick, toxic atmosphere that would have been lethal to most oxygen-breathing species. The combatants wore protective suits, but the suits could be damaged by weapon fire. As the match progressed, both fighters had to balance aggressive tactics with protecting their life support systems. The videos continued for hours, showing her the incredible variety and complexity of arena combat. These weren't simple gladiatorial matches. They were elaborate tests of skill, intelligence, adaptability, and courage. Sarah began to understand why the Overlord had been so confident that human capabilities would translate well to this environment. Her people's reputation for adaptability and refusal to give up would indeed be valuable here. But she also realized that raw determination wouldn't be enough. She would need to study every aspect of arena combat and prepare herself for challenges that could come from any direction. A soft chime drew her attention to a side chamber she hadn't noticed before. Inside, she found a comprehensive exercise facility with equipment designed for multiple different alien physiologies. Some of it she could identify and use immediately, while other devices were completely foreign to her. But there was one section that made her smile for the first time since her capture. Someone had installed human-standard exercise equipment, weight machines, a treadmill, even a heavy bag for martial arts practice. The Overlord was clearly serious about giving her every opportunity to succeed. Sarah spent the rest of the day exploring her temporary home and beginning to plan her training regimen. She had 7 days to prepare for her first match, and she intended to use every hour effectively. The lives of dozens of innocent people depended on her success, and she would not let them down. As the ship's artificial night cycle dimmed the lights, Sarah lay on a surprisingly comfortable bed and stared up at the ceiling. Tomorrow, her real preparation would begin. She would study every piece of combat footage available, push her physical conditioning to its limits, and do everything in her power to understand what she would be facing in the arena. But despite her determination, one question kept echoing in her mind. What kind of opponent would they choose for humanity's first gladiatorial representative? The Overlord had made it clear that her first match would be crucial not just for her survival, but for his own reputation and profit. He would want to make a statement to prove his point about human capabilities. That could work in her favor if he chose an opponent she could realistically defeat. But it could also mean she was about to face something so dangerous that defeating it would shock the entire galaxy. Either way, she would find out soon enough. Sarah closed her eyes and began the mental exercises that had helped her through countless dangerous missions. In 7 days, she would step into an arena and fight for her life while thousands of alien spectators watched. But she had faced impossible odds before, and she was still alive. Tomorrow, she would begin preparing to do it again. The transport shuttle carrying Sarah to the arena complex was nothing like the crude prison ship she had expected. Instead, she found herself in a luxurious passenger compartment with padded seats, climate control, and a viewport that offered stunning views of the Drachma system. The message was clear: gladiators were valuable entertainment, not mere prisoners. Beside her sat Kexthul, a veteran trainer assigned by the arena management to prepare her for what lay ahead. He belonged to a species she didn't recognize, tall and thin, with gray skin and large, intelligent eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried a musical quality that made even dire warnings sound almost pleasant. 7 years I have been training gladiators, Kexthul said as the shuttle approached the massive arena complex. I have seen warriors from 43 different species enter the arena. Do you know how many of my students have survived more than 5 matches? Sarah studied his face for any hint of deception. How many? 12. out of nearly 300 trainees. He leaned forward in his seat. But do not let these numbers discourage you, human Sarah. Most of those who died were slaves forced into combat, or volunteers seeking quick wealth without understanding the true nature of what they faced. You are different. Through the viewport, Sarah could see their destination taking shape ahead of them. The arena complex was a city unto itself, built on and around a small moon that had been completely transformed for entertainment. Massive stadiums rose from the surface like gleaming monuments, connected by bridges and transport tubes that sparkled with flowing lights. Even from this distance, she could see the streams of ships arriving and departing, spectators coming from across the galaxy to witness the games. Different how, she asked. You are a trained warrior, not a desperate amateur. You have studied the combat footage for 7 days without flinching or showing fear. Most importantly, you fight not for yourself, but for others. That gives you strength that mere personal ambition cannot provide. The shuttle docked at what appeared to be a private facility separate from the main spectator areas. As they disembarked, Sarah was struck by the sheer scale of everything around her. The ceiling of the docking bay was easily 100 meters high, and the space was filled with vessels from dozens of different civilizations. The air hummed with multiple languages and the sound of complex machinery. Kexthul led her through a maze of corridors that seemed designed to impress and intimidate. The walls were lined with holographic displays showing legendary matches from arena history, while the floors were made from polished stone that reflected their footsteps in perfect detail. Everything spoke of wealth, power, and the deadly serious business of entertainment. Your first match, Kexthul said as they walked, has generated considerable excitement among the arena patrons. Word has spread that a human will be competing for the first time. The betting pools have reached record levels. What are the odds? Against you? Approximately 50 to 1. He glanced at her sideways. But that is based on ignorance rather than knowledge. Most of the galaxy knows very little about human capabilities. This works to our advantage. They stopped before a massive door marked with symbols that seemed to shift and change as Sarah looked at them. Kexthul placed his hand on a scanner, and the portal opened to reveal something that took her breath away. The chamber beyond was enormous, easily the size of several football fields. But it wasn't the scale that shocked her. It was what the space contained. Rising from the center of the room was what could only be described as a mountain, complete with rocky crags, forests of alien trees, and what appeared to be a system of caves and tunnels running throughout its structure. Behold, Kexthul said with obvious pride, Arena 17, the Dragon's Lair. Your combat environment for tomorrow's match. Sarah walked to the edge of a walkway that allowed visitors to observe the arena from above. The artificial mountain was incredibly detailed, with ecosystems that looked completely real. She could see streams of water flowing down its sides, birds or bird-like creatures flying among the trees, and what appear to be various types of wildlife moving through the underbrush. This is where I'll be fighting? Indeed. Arena 17 is considered one of the most challenging environments in the complex. The terrain is difficult, the wildlife is dangerous, and the cave systems are designed to confuse and disorient combatants. Sarah studied the layout carefully, her tactical mind already analyzing potential advantages and threats. The mountain would provide cover and multiple routes of movement, but it would also make it easy to lose track of opponents or become trapped in dead-end passages. The wildlife added an unpredictable element that both she and her opponent would have to account for. Speaking of opponents, she said, Who am I fighting? Kexthul was quiet for a long moment, which told her more than she wanted to know. That information will be revealed tomorrow, just before the match begins. But I can tell you this. The Arena Masters have chosen something spectacular for humanity's debut. They want to make a statement. They spent the next several hours touring the arena from different vantage points, while Kexthul explained the various challenges she might face. The cave systems were filled with traps and puzzles that would need to be solved while under combat pressure. Some of the wildlife was merely dangerous, while other creatures had been specifically modified to be more aggressive and deadly. The terrain itself could shift during combat, with rock slides, collapsing bridges, and other hazards activated remotely to increase the challenge. How do I win? Sarah asked as they concluded the tour. That depends entirely on your opponent and the specific victory conditions set for the match. Sometimes it is simple elimination. Last combatant standing wins. Sometimes there are objectives to complete. Reach a specific location, retrieve an artifact, solve a complex puzzle. The arena masters pride themselves on variety. But there are always weapons provided? Yes, though they may not be easily accessible. Part of the challenge is often finding and claiming the equipment you need to survive. As they returned to the preparation areas, Sarah felt the weight of tomorrow's challenge settling on her shoulders. She had fought in complex environments before, but never as pure entertainment for alien spectators who had no investment in her survival beyond their betting slips. That evening, alone in her quarters, Sarah continued studying the combat footage from previous matches in Arena 17. The more she watched, the more she understood why this environment had been chosen for her debut. It would test every aspect of her military training: tactics, marksmanship, close combat, survival skills, and problem-solving under pressure. But there was something else in the footage that caught her attention. In match after match, she noticed that the most successful fighters weren't necessarily the strongest or fastest. They were the ones who adapted quickly to unexpected situations and found creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. They were the ones who refused to give up even when victory seemed impossible. In other words, they fought like humans. The next morning arrived with the sound of increasing activity throughout the complex. Sarah could hear the rumble of spectator ships arriving, the announcements echoing through the corridors, and the general buzz of excitement that preceded a major event. Through her window, she could see the streams of beings making their way to the spectator areas, dozens of different species, all gathered to watch her fight for her life. Kexthul arrived early to escort her through the pre-match preparations. First came a medical examination to confirm she was fit for combat, conducted by a team of alien physicians who seemed genuinely curious about human physiology. Then came the formal registration process, where her image and basic information were recorded for the arena's historical records. Win or lose, Kexthul explained, your name will be remembered as the first human gladiator. That is no small honor. The final preparation took place in a chamber just outside the arena itself. Here, Sarah was fitted with a basic protective vest and given a choice of 3 different starting weapons: a projectile rifle, an energy sword, or a set of enhanced combat gauntlets. She chose the rifle, as it would give her the best chance of engaging threats at distance while she learned the arena's layout. Any final advice? She asked Kexthul as they waited for the match to begin. Trust your instincts. The arena will try to overwhelm you with its complexity, but remember that every challenge has a solution. Find a pattern, adapt to the unexpected, and never stop moving forward. The door to the arena opened with a deep rumble that she felt in her bones. Beyond lay the mountain environment she had studied, but seeing it from ground level was completely different from observing it from above. The artificial sky was a pale purple that cast strange shadows among the rocks and trees. The air carried scents of alien vegetation and the distant sound of wildlife. Sarah stepped into Arena 17 and immediately moved toward the nearest cover, a cluster of large boulders that would provide protection while she assessed the situation. The audience was invisible from the arena floor, but she could hear their voices as a distant rumble of anticipation. A voice echoed across the arena, speaking in universal standard for her benefit, while simultaneously translating into dozens of other languages. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all classifications, welcome to Arena 17 for this historic match. For the first time in the recorded history of the Drakmar Games, a human warrior will compete for your entertainment. The crowd's roar was deafening, even filtered through whatever audio system carried it to the arena floor. Sarah used the noise as cover to move to a better position, climbing on a higher ground where she could see more of the terrain around her. Representing the warrior traditions of Earth and humanity's colonies, we present Captain Sarah Chun of the Human Defense Corps. Her opponent today represents a very different tradition, one of the arena's most successful and dangerous competitors. Sarah's blood went cold as a massive gate opened on the opposite side of the arena. What emerged was unlike anything she had ever faced in battle. The creature was easily 15 feet long from nose to tail, covered in scales that shifted color as it moved. Its head was distinctly draconic, with intelligent eyes and a mouth filled with teeth designed for tearing. But this wasn't some mindless beast. As it entered the arena, it moved with the calculated precision of a trained fighter, scanning the terrain for advantages and threats. Ladies and gentlemen, the legendary Thrakmor, veteran of 37 arena victories, master of fire and fury, the Dragon of Drakmor. Sarah watched in fascination and horror as the dragon, for that's clearly what it was, despite being obviously alien in origin, began to stalk through the arena. It moved like a predator, but one that understood tactics and strategy. This wasn't going to be a simple hunt. This was going to be a battle between two intelligent warriors, one of whom happened to breathe fire. As if summoned by her thoughts, Thrakmor suddenly reared up on its hind legs and unleashed a stream of flame that turned a section of forest into an inferno. The message was clear. The dragon knew she was watching and wanted her to understand what she was facing. Sarah checked her rifle and began moving through the terrain, using the cover of rocks and trees to avoid detection while she studied her opponent's behavior. The dragon was clearly experienced in arena combat, probably with specific knowledge of this environment that she lacked. But she had advantages too: human ingenuity, adaptability, and the kind of stubborn refusal to quit that had made her species legendary across the galaxy. The hunt was about to begin, and Sarah Chun intended to prove that humanity deserved its reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous warriors. Even against a fire-breathing dragon in its own domain, she would find a way to survive and win. The real question wasn't whether she could defeat Thrakmor. It was what would happen when she did. Because something told her that winning this first match would only be the beginning of an even greater challenge. As she disappeared into the alien wilderness of Arena 17, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to discover something about the dragon, about the arena, and about herself that would change everything she thought she knew about this deadly game. Sarah opened fire immediately, her rifle sending a stream of energy bolts into the creature's center mass. The shot struck home, but seemed to do little damage. The thing absorbed the energy and kept coming, its mechanical limbs extending razor-sharp cutting implements as it closed the distance. She rolled behind one of the metal pillars just as the creature's blade sliced through the air where her head had been. The thing was fast, much faster than its jerky movements had suggested, and it seemed to be adapting to her tactics in real time. A roar echoed through the chamber as Thrakmor burst through the passage entrance, moving with more speed and fury than Sarah had seen from the dragon during their entire hunt. But the dragon's rage wasn't directed at her. Instead, Thrakmor launched itself at the mechanical creature with claws extended and flame pouring from its mouth. The battle between dragon and machine was unlike anything Sarah had ever witnessed. The creature's cutting tools could slice through Thrakmor's scales, drawing bright streams of blood, but the dragon's flame breath seemed to disrupt the thing's electronic systems. Each time Thrakmor bathed in fire, the creature would stagger and lose coordination, giving the dragon time to strike with claws and teeth. But there were more of them coming. Sarah could hear the mechanical clicking and whirring from multiple directions as additional creatures emerged from deeper in the cave system. Whatever this place was, it had been infested with these things, and they were clearly hostile to any living beings that entered their domain. The pillars. Thrakmor suddenly spoke, its voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from deep in its chest. Sarah was so shocked to hear the dragon speak that she almost missed the meaning of the words. destroy the power pillars. Sarah looked around the chamber and realized what the dragon meant. The glowing metal structures weren't just decorative. They were power sources for the mechanical creatures. If she could disrupt their energy supply, she might be able to disable the things, or at least slow them down. She switched her rifle to its highest power setting and began targeting the base of the nearest pillar. The metal was incredibly dense, requiring multiple shots to penetrate, but eventually she managed to punch through to whatever power source lay within. The pillar's light flickered and died, and immediately one of the mechanical creatures stopped moving and collapsed. Thrackmore, meanwhile, was holding off two more of the things while moving protectively between Sarah and another passage that seemed to be spawning even more hostiles. The dragon was clearly wounded, with several deep cuts bleeding freely, but it fought with the desperate fury of a creature protecting something precious. "Human Sarah," the dragon called out between bursts of flame. "There are too many. We must retreat." Sarah destroyed a second pillar, disabling another two creatures, but she could see more mechanical horrors pouring into the chamber from multiple directions. The dragon was right. They needed to get out of this ancient facility before they were overwhelmed. "This way," she called, identifying a passage that seemed to lead back toward the surface. Thrackmore immediately began backing toward her, using controlled flame bursts to keep the remaining creatures at bay. They fought their way out of the chamber together, Sarah providing covering fire while the dragon used its massive bulk to block the passage behind them. The mechanical creatures followed, but their movements seemed sluggish away from their power sources, giving the unlikely allies time to reach clearer ground. When they finally emerged from the cave system back into the arena's artificial daylight, both warriors were exhausted and wounded. Sarah's rifle charge was nearly depleted, and Thrackmore was bleeding from multiple cuts along its flanks and wings. They looked at each other across a small clearing, both breathing hard, both aware that their relationship had fundamentally changed in the darkness below. "You can speak," Sarah said finally. The dragon's great head nodded slowly. "All of us can speak, human. But the arena masters prefer that spectators believe we are merely intelligent beasts. It makes the entertainment more palatable for some species. Us? There are others like you. Many. Dragons, as you call us, are actually the Drachmarie, an ancient species that once ruled this entire system. When the arena masters came, they offered us a choice: compete for their entertainment or face extinction. Most of us chose to live, even if that life meant fighting for the amusement of others." Sarah felt a wave of nausea as the full implications hit her. "The gladiatorial games, you're not volunteers. You're slaves. In all but name, yes. Though successful gladiators do earn certain privileges and freedoms that make our captivity bearable." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of multiple aircraft approaching from different directions. Sarah looked up to see arena security vehicles surrounding their position, hovering just above the tree line with weapons trained on both fighters. A voice boomed across the arena from the public address system. "Gladiators, you have strayed into a restricted area of the arena complex. You will return immediately to the designated combat zones, or face immediate disqualification and termination." Thrackmore looked at Sarah with what she was learning to recognize as regret. "I am sorry, human. I hoped to show you the truth about this place before we were forced to complete our match. But it seems we have run out of time." "What truth?" "That chamber we discovered. It is one of many ancient facilities built by my people long before the arena masters arrived. They contain technology and records that prove the Drachmarie once ruled this entire sector of the galaxy. The arena masters have spent centuries ensuring that evidence remains hidden." Sarah understood immediately, because if the galaxy knew the truth, they might question the legitimacy of the games themselves. Exactly. And more than that, they might realize that the legendary dragons they pay to watch fight are actually the rightful rulers of this system, enslaved for entertainment. The security aircraft began descending, clearly preparing to intervene directly if the two fighters didn't comply with orders. Sarah looked at the wounded dragon, then at the weapons trained on them from above, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Thrackmore," she said quietly, "how would you like to help me escape from this place?" The dragon's eyes widened with something that might have been hope. "Human, even if we could somehow evade the security forces, there is nowhere to run. This entire system is controlled by the arena masters." "Maybe, but I have something they don't know about." "Which is?" Sarah smiled grimly. "I'm not just a gladiator. I'm a human defense corps officer. And my people have a very strict policy about leaving their personnel behind in enemy hands." Before Thrackmore could ask what she meant, the sky above them suddenly filled with new shapes, sleek, predatory vessels that didn't match any of the arena's security craft. The newcomers opened fire immediately, targeting the arena security vehicles with precision strikes that spoke of military training and superior technology. The lead vessel dropped low enough for Sarah to see the insignia painted on its hull, the crossed stars of the Human Defense Corps. Her rescue had arrived, right on schedule. But as she watched human fighters engage arena security forces in the skies above, Sarah realized she faced a new dilemma. She could escape now, return to human space, and leave Thrackmore and the other enslaved Drachmarie to their fate in the arena. Or she could try to do something that would probably get her killed, but might actually make a difference for an entire species of enslaved beings. "Thrackmore," she said as weapons fire lit up the sky above them, "how many of your people are imprisoned in this arena complex?" "Nearly 1,000, spread across dozens of different facilities. And how many would fight for their freedom if given the chance?" The dragon's eyes began to glow with something Sarah had never seen there before. Not hope, but fury. The kind of righteous anger that had once driven a proud species to rule among the stars. "All of us," Thrackmore growled. "Every single one of us." Sarah nodded and activated her emergency beacon, sending a coded message to the Defense Corps ships above. What she was about to request would probably end her military career and might well start an interstellar incident. But sometimes, she reflected, doing the right thing required accepting personal consequences. "Then, let's go free them," she said. As human and dragon ran through the alien forest together, dodging weapons fire from above and below, Sarah couldn't help but smile. She had entered Arena 17 expecting to fight for her own survival and the freedom of a few dozen human prisoners. Instead, she was about to attempt something far more ambitious: the liberation of an entire enslaved species. The bond that had formed between her and Thrackmore in the darkness of the ancient facility was indeed unthinkable by the standards of gladiatorial combat. But it was exactly the kind of alliance that might be needed to bring down an empire built on suffering and entertainment. The real battle was about to begin, and this time, Sarah wouldn't be fighting alone. The hunt becomes something more. Sarah crouched behind a fallen tree, her rifle trained on the path where she had last seen Thrackmore moving through the artificial forest. 3 hours had passed since the match began, and what she had expected to be a straightforward hunt had become something far more complex and disturbing. The dragon wasn't hunting her, not exactly. Instead, it seemed to be hurting her, using controlled bursts of flame and strategic positioning to guide her movement through the arena. Every time she tried to circle back or take an unexpected route, Thrackmore would appear at just the right moment to block her path and force her in a specific direction. But there was something else that troubled her even more. Twice now, when she had been in genuine danger from the arena's environmental hazards, the dragon had actually helped her. When a rockslide had trapped her in a narrow canyon, Thrackmore had appeared and used its flame breath to superheat the rocks until they cracked, giving her an escape route. When she had stumbled into quicksand near one of the streams, the dragon had thrown her a heavy branch to pull herself out. None of this made sense for a standard gladiatorial match. Opponents didn't help each other survive environmental hazards. They used those hazards as weapons. But every time she tried to understand Thrackmore's behavior, the dragon would resume what appeared to be normal hunting, forcing her to focus on immediate survival rather than long-term strategy. The path ahead led into a cave system that burrowed deep into the artificial mountain. Sarah knew from her study of the arena that these caves were among the most dangerous areas in the environment, filled with traps, dead ends, and creatures that were even more hostile than those on the surface. But Thrackmore was clearly pushing her toward the cave entrance, leaving her no choice but to enter. She switched on the light attached to her rifle and stepped into the darkness. The cave was larger than she had expected, with multiple passages branching off in different directions. Strange bioluminescent fungi provided patches of eerie light, while the sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere in the depths. Behind her, she heard the scrape of claws on stone as Thrackmore followed her into the cave system. But the dragon's movements were different now, more cautious, almost protective. Sarah began to wonder if something in these caves posed a threat to both of them. She chose the leftmost passage and began moving deeper into the mountain. The air grew thicker and more humid, carrying scents of decay and something else she couldn't identify. Her military training had taught her to trust her instincts when something felt wrong, and every instinct she had was screaming warnings about this place. The passage opened into a large chamber filled with what appeared to be artificial structures, metal pillars, and platforms that were clearly not part of the natural cave system. As Sarah explored the space, she realized she was looking at some kind of ancient facility built into the mountain long before it had been converted into an arena. Strange symbols covered the walls, and several of the metal structures were still glowing with a soft, pulsing light that suggested active technology. This wasn't part of the arena's entertainment infrastructure. This was something much older and potentially much more dangerous. A sound behind her made her spin around, rifle ready. But instead of the dragon, she found herself facing something that made her blood freeze in her veins. The creature that emerged from the shadows was nothing like the alien wildlife she had encountered elsewhere in the arena. This thing was clearly artificial, a nightmare fusion of metal and organic components that moved with the jerky, unnatural gait of a machine pretending to be alive. Its eyes were glowing sensors, and the sounds it made were the clicks and whirs of mechanical systems rather than any kind of natural vocalization. Sarah opened fire immediately, her rifle sending a stream of energy bolts into the creature's center mass. The shot struck home, but seemed to do little damage. The thing Commander Rodriguez materialized in a shimmer of transport energy, flanked by a full squad of Human Defense Corps Special Operations troops. Sarah had never been so glad to see her commanding officer, even though she knew the conversation they were about to have would be anything but pleasant. "Captain Shun," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had spent the last week negotiating with politicians and admirals, "please tell me you have a very good reason for requesting military support for what appears to be a prison break involving several hundred alien criminals." Sarah stood at attention despite her torn uniform and bleeding wounds. Beside her, Thrackmore crouched low in what she was learning to recognize as a respectful posture among his people. Above them, the battle between human fighters and arena security continued, but the Defense Corps vessels were clearly winning. "Sir, they're not criminals. They're political prisoners, an enslaved species forced to fight for entertainment. I'm requesting asylum for them under the Interstellar Convention on Sentient Rights." Rodriguez looked at the dragon, then back at Sarah. "Captain, that convention doesn't apply to gladiators who voluntarily enter arena combat. Respectfully, sir, there's nothing voluntary about their situation. The Drachmae were given a choice between slavery and genocide. That's not a legal basis for enslavement under any civilized legal system." Thrackmore spoke up, his deep voice carrying clearly despite the noise of battle overhead. "Commander Rodriguez, I am Thrackmore, son of the last Drachmae High Council. My people ruled this system for 10,000 years before the Arena Masters arrived with overwhelming force and ultimatums. We were never defeated in honorable combat. We were coerced into slavery through threats against our young and our civilians." Rodriguez studied the dragon carefully. Sarah could see her commanding officer's analytical mind processing the political and military implications of what they were being told. How many of your people are we talking about? Nearly 1,000 in this facility alone, Thrackmore replied. But there are other arena complexes throughout the galaxy where more of my people are imprisoned. The total number enslaved could be in the tens of thousands. And you believe they would all fight to escape? Commander, Sarah interrupted, you should see what I discovered in the caves below this arena. The Drachmarie had advanced technology and civilization when most of the galaxy was still developing spaceflight. They're not primitive beasts. They're an highly intelligent species with every right to self-determination. Rodriguez activated his communicator. Admiral Morrison, this is Ground Team Leader. I need to speak with you immediately about expanding our mission parameters. While her commander conferred with the fleet, Sarah turned to Thrackmore. Can you contact other dragons in the complex? Let them know what's happening. We maintain communication networks despite the Arena Master's attempts to prevent it. But, Sarah, human, freeing us from this one facility will not end our enslavement. The Arena Masters have political connections throughout the galaxy. They will mobilize every resource to recapture us or destroy us rather than risk exposure of the truth about their operations. Then, we need to make sure the truth gets out before they can silence anyone. Rodriguez finished his conversation and returned to them. Captain, Admiral Morrison has agreed to expand our operation, but with strict limitations. We can provide asylum for any being who requests it and can establish legitimate grounds for refugee status. But we cannot engage in offensive operations against arena facilities that might be considered acts of war. Sarah nodded. Understood, sir. Purely defensive operations to protect refugees seeking asylum. Exactly. Rodriguez smiled grimly. Now, how do we get to the other imprisoned members of Thrackmore's species without starting an interstellar incident? Thrackmore stood to his full height, wings spreading wide despite his wounds. Leave that to us, Commander. The Drachmarie remember how to fight as warriors rather than entertainment. The next several hours unfolded like a carefully orchestrated military operation, despite officially being a humanitarian rescue mission. Thrackmore used the Drachmarie communication network to spread word of the liberation throughout the arena complex. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dragons began breaking out of their holding facilities across the entire installation. But these weren't random acts of violence. They were precisely coordinated strikes against specific targets. Guard posts were neutralized with minimal casualties, communication centers were captured intact, and critical systems were secured rather than destroyed. Sarah found herself serving as a liaison between the human forces and the emerging Drachmarie resistance. It was unlike any role she had ever filled in her military career, requiring her to balance tactical coordination with political diplomacy while under fire. Your people are remarkably disciplined for beings who have been enslaved for generations, she commented to Thrackmore as they coordinated the liberation of another dragon-holding facility. We never stopped being warriors, human Sarah. We simply hid our true nature behind the facade they required us to maintain. Thrackmore's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as another squad of his people emerged from their former prison, now armed with captured arena security weapons. But we never forgot who we were or what we had lost. The arena masters, meanwhile, were discovering that their security forces were completely unprepared for coordinated resistance. Their systems had been designed to prevent individual escapes, not mass uprisings by organized military forces. When dragons who had been forced to fight each other for entertainment suddenly began working together as tactical units, the results were devastating for their captors. But Sarah knew the real test would come when reinforcements arrived. The arena masters wouldn't simply accept the loss of their most valuable entertainment assets. They would call in every favor and resource to prevent the truth about Drachmarie enslavement from becoming public knowledge. That test came sooner than expected. Multiple contacts incoming, reported Lieutenant Harrison from the defense perimeter the human forces had established. Configurations suggest heavy military vessels, not arena security. Sarah looked up at the tactical display and felt her heart sink. The ships approaching the complex belonged to the Corvathian Empire. the same species that had captured her originally. But these weren't simple raiders. These were frontline warships with enough firepower to turn the entire moon into molten slag. "Thrackmore," she said, "it looks like your former captors called in some serious help." The dragons studied the display with the eye of an experienced warrior. "The overlord who sponsored your gladiatorial career has significant investments in these games. He will not accept their disruption lightly." Rodriguez joined them at the command post they had established in what had once been the arena's main control center. "Admiral Morrison reports that the Corvathian fleet is demanding we withdraw immediately and surrender all escaped prisoners. They're claiming authority under some kind of pre-existing treaty with the arena masters. Do we have any legal grounds to refuse? That depends on whether we can establish that the dragons qualify for refugee status under interstellar law. The problem is we need time to document their situation properly, and the Corvathians aren't inclined to give us that time." Sarah looked at the hundreds of dragons who had gathered in the arena's central plaza, many still bearing the scars of their years in captivity. Children, young dragons she hadn't even known existed, huddled close to their parents, while the adult warriors formed protective circles around the most vulnerable. "How long do you need to complete the documentation?" she asked. "At least 12 hours to do it properly. Maybe 6 if we cut some corners. Then we hold them off for 6 hours. Rodriguez looked at her sharply. "Captain, those are Corvathian battle cruisers. Our rescue fleet has 1 destroyer and 3 frigates. The math doesn't work in our favor." Thrackmore made a sound that Sarah was learning to recognize as laughter. "Commander Rodriguez, you're thinking like someone who fights with ships and technology. But we're defending our children and our freedom. That changes the mathematics considerably." Before Rodriguez could respond, the first Corvathian ships opened fire, targeting the arena's defensive installations with precision strikes. The message was clear: surrender immediately or face total destruction. Sarah activated the complex's public address system, broadcasting on all frequencies so that both the human and Corvathian forces would hear her words clearly. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the Human Defense Corps, speaking on behalf of the Drachmary people seeking asylum in human space. We are conducting a legal rescue operation for political refugees under the protection of the Interstellar Convention on Sentient Rights. Any attacks on this facility constitute acts of war against both the Human Federation and the sovereign Drachmary people." The response came immediately from the lead Corvathian vessel. "Captain Chun, you are harboring stolen property belonging to legitimate business interests. Surrender the escaped gladiators immediately or face the consequences." Sarah looked at Thrackmore, then at Commander Rodriguez, and finally at the young dragons sheltering in the plaza below. Sometimes she realized the right choice was also the most dangerous one. Negative Corvathian vessel. These beings are under our protection. If you want them, you'll have to go through us. As the first enemy missile streaked toward the arena complex, Sarah couldn't help but smile. She had entered this place as a single prisoner facing impossible odds in gladiatorial combat. Now she was part of something much larger, a fight for the freedom of an entire species, with allies she never could have imagined. The battle for Dragon's Lair was about to begin, and this time, the dragons will be fighting for themselves. 6 months after the Battle of Dragon's Lair, Sarah stood on the observation deck of New Drachmar Station, watching as the latest group of rescued dragons emerged from a transport ship. Each arrival brought the total number of liberated Drachmary closer to the 10,000 mark, representing the largest successful refugee operation in recent galactic history. Beside her, Thrackmore was reviewing reports from liberation operations across 12 different star systems. The network of arena facilities had been even more extensive than anyone had imagined, but the coordinated strikes led by human forces and Drachmary resistance cells had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. "The facility on Kepler 7 was the last one," Thrackmore reported. "Every known arena complex that held my people has now been liberated or abandoned by their operators." Sarah nodded, feeling a satisfaction she had rarely experienced in her military career. "And the war crimes tribunals?" "Proceeding better than expected. The evidence we recovered from the ancient facilities has proven invaluable in establishing the historical context of our enslavement. Several arena master organizations have already agreed to reparations rather than face full prosecution. Through the viewport, Sarah could see the construction crews putting finishing touches on the new habitat domes that would house the growing Drachmarie population. The station itself was built around one of the larger asteroids in the system the Human Federation had granted to the Dragons as a sovereign territory, but already there were talks of expanding to planetary surfaces. "Any word from the Galactic Council on your petition for full member status?" she asked. Thrackmore's expression, as much as she could read dragon expressions after months of practice, showed cautious optimism. "The vote is next month. Our supporters believe we have the numbers, especially with humanity's backing." The process hadn't been simple. Establishing that the Drachmarie were a legitimate civilization rather than an exotic species had required extensive documentation and political maneuvering. But the discovery of the ancient facilities, combined with testimony from thousands of liberated dragons, had gradually convinced most of the galaxy that a great injustice had been perpetrated. Captain Chun, the voice belonged to Lieutenant Harrison, who had been promoted and assigned to the new Joint Human Drachmarie Task Force. "There's someone here to see you." Sarah turned to find a young dragon approaching them, one she didn't immediately recognize, though something about the newcomer's bearing seemed familiar. "This is KY Xandra," Thrackmore said, and Sarah heard something unusual in his voice. "My daughter." Sarah stared in shock. In all their months of working together, Thrackmore had never mentioned having children. She had assumed that dragon families had been completely disrupted by the enslavement process. KY Xandra was smaller than most adult dragons Sarah had met, with scales that shifted from deep green to silver, depending on the light. When she spoke, her voice carried the same musical quality as her father's, but with a younger, more energetic tone. "Captain Chun, I wanted to thank you for giving my father hope again. For the first 20 years of my life, I watched him fight in the arena and saw the light in his eyes grow dimmer with each match. But since the liberation, he has become the dragon I always hoped he could be." "Your father is the one who made the liberation possible," Sarah replied. "His courage in that cave system, his willingness to trust a human stranger, that's what started everything." KY Xandra's head tilted in what Sarah had learned was a sign of curiosity among dragons. "May I ask you something personal, Captain?" "Of course. Why did you choose to help us? You could have escaped when your rescue ships arrived. Instead, you risked everything for beings you had just met." Sarah considered the question carefully. It was something she had asked herself many times over the past months, especially during the more difficult moments of the Liberation campaign. "I think," she said finally, "it comes down to what I saw in your father's eyes when we were fighting those machines in the cave. He wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting to protect me, a stranger who was supposed to be his enemy. That told me everything I needed to know about what kind of people the Drachmarie really are." Thrackmore made a sound that Sarah now recognized as deep contentment. "And what you showed me, human Sarah, was that not all of the galaxy had forgotten what honor means. That there were still beings willing to risk everything for strangers, simply because it was the right thing to do." Lieutenant Harrison cleared his throat politely. "Ma'am, Admiral Morrison is requesting your presence in the communication center. There's a priority message from Earth Command." Sarah excused herself and made her way through the station's corridors, noting how naturally human and dragon personnel worked together now. The integration had been remarkably smooth, probably because both species shared similar values about duty, honor, and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Admiral Morrison was waiting for her in the communication center, along with a holographic projection of Fleet Admiral Zhang from Earth Command. Sarah came to attention, wondering if she was finally about to face consequences for the unauthorized expansion of what was supposed to have been a simple rescue mission. "Captain Chun," Admiral Zhang began, "I've been reviewing your actions during the Dragon's Lair incident and the subsequent liberation operations." Sarah braced herself. "Yes, ma'am. Your decisions to exceed mission parameters, request asylum for the Drachmarie refugees, and coordinate military operations with an alien resistance movement were all technically violations of standing orders. I understand, ma'am. Zhang smiled, which is why I'm promoting you to Major and assigning you as the permanent human liaison to the Drachmary government. Congratulations, Major Chun. Your unauthorized initiative has become the foundation of one of humanity's most important strategic alliances. Sarah felt a wave of relief and pride. Thank you, ma'am. I won't disappoint you. I don't think that's possible. The partnership between humanity and the Drachmary has already proven invaluable in 3 separate diplomatic crises. Having allies who breathe fire and remember 10,000 years of galactic history turns out to be quite useful. After the communication ended, Sarah returned to the observation deck to find Thrakmor and Kawaixindra engaged in animated conversation with several other dragons. When they saw her approaching, Thrakmor stood and approached her with formal dignity. Major Chun, he said, having somehow already learned of her promotion, I have been authorized by the Drachmary Council to make you a formal offer. What kind of offer? Honorary citizenship in our rebuilt nation, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. You would be the first non-Drachmary to receive this honor in our recorded history. Sarah was speechless for a long moment. She had entered the arena as a prisoner, expecting to die for the entertainment of alien spectators. Now, she was being offered citizenship in a civilization that was older than human spaceflight. I'm honored, she said finally. But what would that mean, practically speaking? Kawaixindra spoke up. It would mean you are family, Major Chun. It would mean that wherever you go in the galaxy, you would have the protection and support of every Drachmary you might encounter. And it would mean that your children and your children's children would always have a place among us. Thrakmor nodded solemnly. The bond that formed between us in that cave system has grown into something that will outlast both our lifetimes. You helped free my people, but more than that, you showed us that the galaxy still contains beings worth trusting and worth fighting alongside. Sarah looked out at the construction ships building new homes for the dragons, at the mixed human and Drachmary crews working together, at the young dragons playing in the recreation areas without fear of being forced into combat for entertainment. All of it had started with a desperate gamble in an alien arena, with the decision to trust a dragon who had every reason to see her as an enemy. I accept, she said, and I want you to know that the bond you're talking about, it changed me too. Before I met you, I fought for duty and honor and the protection of human space. Now I understand that those same values extend far beyond any single species. As the 3 of them stood together watching the bustling activity of New Drachmar Station, Sarah reflected on how impossible this moment would have seemed just months ago. She had been locked in a dragon's lair, facing what appeared to be certain death in gladiatorial combat. Instead, she had found allies, friends, and a new understanding of what it meant to fight for something larger than herself. The bond that had followed truly was unthinkable by the standards of the galaxy she had known before. But it had become the foundation of something much more important, proof that even in a universe often dominated by exploitation and violence, there were still beings willing to risk everything for strangers, simply because it was right. Years later, when young dragons and humans would ask Major Sarah Chan about the liberation of the arena worlds, she would always tell them that the real victory hadn't been military. It had been the moment when 2 warriors from different species, trapped in an impossible situation, chose to trust each other instead of fighting to the death. That choice had changed everything, and its effects would ripple through the galaxy for generations to come. The bond between human and dragon had indeed been unthinkable, but it had also been unbreakable, and that made all the difference in the universe.